As the opening credits flash, Sofia Coppola's 2006 film Marie Antoinette deliberately engages its audience with its use of contemporary music, aesthetics and costume, and an identifiable teen queen. As Gang of Four sings lyrics like, "The problem of leisure,
I do
love and you purchase," the camera reveals the infamous queen herself, played by Kirsten Dunst, lying on a chaise lounge surrounded by pink confections as her maid delicately slips a pink pump onto her foot. Coppola uses dress to provide a visual representation of the reputation Marie Antoinette is associated with, a narcissistic and financially reckless queen. Upswept hair, provocative white lace gown, and the frosting-coloured shoes, almost too pretty to eat, symbolise the overconsumption of luxury and reinforce the infamous image of Marie as an idle shopaholic. There is an interdependence between the costuming and the wanted interpretation of the film's main character. But Coppola adds something else. Surrounded by pink confections, Dunst leans forward to eat the icing whilst looking directly into the camera and chuckles, as if she is laughing at her indifference and inviting us, the viewer, to be her confidant. By breaking the fourth wall, Coppola confronts the biggest assumption of the queen. Indifferent to her subject's starvation, and flippantly advised,
let them eat cake.
This is not the Marie we will come to know in Coppola's film. The message to young 21st century women is unmissable. Forget what you think you know. This is the real story. Marie was just a young girl caught up in extraordinary circumstances. When watching the film, as a viewer you realise that this is not a standard period film, and instead you will realise it's an impressionistic take on a person, not the historical. Coppola even adapted the screenplay from a biographical novel called Marie Antoinette by Antonia Fraser, not from a history book. Focused on Marie's personal life, the film is not concerned with action, but rather emotion, making the narrative episodic in a sense. This can be best seen in the costume design by Academy Award winner Milena Canonero. Divided into 4 parts: the early years at Versailles, Marie's party era, motherhood, and finally, mourning. Canonero's costuming deliberately establishes each era of Marie's life visually. Highly stylized, Canonero created the costuming with a historical understanding of 18th century Rococo style and what was fashionable at the court of Versailles. Marie is shown throughout the film wearing historically accurate gowns that are accurate to the time period, and then modified the gowns with pop aesthetics and a modern flair to support the narrative. At the start of pre-production, Coppola gifted Canonero a box of pastel-coloured macaroons, telling Canonero, "These are the colours I love." Light pastel colours and soft, rounded necklines and cuts were used heavily in the costumes during Marie's early years at Versailles, emphasising Marie's youthfulness and innocence, who is attempting to embrace the identity that has been forced upon her and the pressures of navigating the life of being married to the Dauphin of France. Excessively sweet and almost sugar-coated is the best way to describe the choices that Canonero has made for this era, linking Marie to a sweet treat, like a macaroon or a slice of cake. This is most obvious in the choice of accessories Canonero chose for this era. It would have been custom for Marie to wear jewels to indicate her status, but instead, she is seen wearing a bow around her neck, something that highlights Marie's girliness and femininity. This celebration of femininity can be seen throughout Coppola's work. She is interested in the experience of female adolescence and alienation. The costume choices start to change as Marie is scolded for not producing an heir. In one scene, Marie is dressed in a floral gown, reading the letter her mother wrote to her, concerned for her daughter's reputation. Depressed, Marie leans down a wall with similar floral fabric, becoming one with the palace. The expectations are making Marie lose herself in the opulence of Versailles. Because of the pressures Marie is facing at the court, she starts to act out, replacing sex and security with sweet confectionaries, shopping, parties, and champagne. The fast montage, accompanied by Bow Wow's "I Want Candy," is a post-feminist sequence depicting the hedonistic and playful fun Marie is feeling while spending excessive amounts of her allowance. Even the song choice, with lyrics like "I Want Candy," reinforces Marie's childish innocence as a teenage girl, who just so happens to be the Dauphine. Just like the film's narrative, Marie is largely uninterested in the politics that were happening at the time. The lack of explicit political or feminist agenda in the film showcased the post-feminist ideals that Coppola utilizes in her work. With that being said, this sequence may seem superficial, but Coppola shows the ideological weight of aesthetic choices shown on screen. Marie comes across as frivolous as there is an excessive flow of shoes, textiles, ribbons, gowns, pastries, and more presented to the viewer. The costuming in the sequence is particularly interesting, as the play with costume and style confronts the limitations of making a period film. The display of shoes are clearly inspired by 18th century fashion rather than a reproduction of the original, which showcases its purposeful intent rather than a budgetary oversight. Manolo Blahnik, the legendary luxury shoe brand, designed the shoes that were used in the film. As Marie is trying on an array of Blahnik's creations, next to her is a pair of sky blue high-top Converse. The anachronistic feature of Converse in the climactic montage sequence is a reference to 21st century fashion and youth culture, reminding the audience that this is a coming-of-age film about girlhood, not an 18th century period piece. In this era of Marie's life, the pastel colours turn brighter, with yellows, bolder pinks, and darker blues come into play, showcasing Marie as becoming wilder as she acts out. Once Marie finally lives out her duty as Delphine of producing an heir, Marie can finally relax, which is showcased in the costuming. Flowing lines, simple cotton, light fabrics, and muslin dresses replace hooped gowns and ruffles as Marie retreats to Le Petit Triomphe. The costuming and tone of the film shift into a more natural feel as nature takes a more central stage. The bright pastels are swapped for whites and creams, representing a newfound sense of happiness and carefree spirit. It appears that Marie finally feels at peace with herself and her position at Versailles, even if this is only temporary. In the final era of Marie's time at Versailles, the colours grow much darker and the cuts of the gowns are more mature. No longer are we seeing the racy low décolletage like in Marie's party years. Instead, these gowns look heavier and more mature. As she mourns the loss of her son and her mother, and the political unrest is finally catching up to Versailles, Marie starts to feel the consequences of her past actions and dresses in a somewhat permanent state of mourning. No longer are we seeing pastels or creams. Her gowns are reduced to purples, muted blues, and black. On the rare occasion Marie wears pink, a colour so heavily tied to her character throughout the film, it has now lost its brightness and now appearing more sombre. The film ends not with Marie's death, but instead when her extravagant lifestyle has come to an end. The last gown we see her in is dark and muted in colour. Her eventual death is not depicted as a moral lesson, but instead a tragedy. We, the viewer, already know the end of her story.
So Coppola allows Marie, in her final moments on screen, to stay as the girl we got to know. Young, feminine, and beautifully dressed.
I'm saying goodbye.